Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, the newest reboot in the PLL cinematic universe. As you guys know, if you've watched my previous videos, I have been talking about Pretty Little Liars a lot lately, and I've been saying that I want to review this new reboot. Originally I was going to film this video a couple weeks ago when the show was still like relevant, but I did it, so we're getting it now. Overall, what did I think of the show Original Sin? I would say, it's definitely a show. It's definitely something that was a piece of media that was filmed and edited and put onto a streaming service for media consumption. Yeah. When I clicked on the little thumbnail to start watching PLL Original Sin on HBO Max, it was not at all what I expected when I started watching it, because to me it feels almost not at all reminiscent of the original Pretty Little Liars show. So I feel like since these two shows are so different, it's hard for me to really compare them because I feel like it's not really a level playing field. But I'm gonna try to do it anyway because I've seen a lot of people making these comparisons online in recent weeks. And I've seen a lot of people saying that the reboot Original Sin stands up to or even like surpasses the original Pretty Little Liars, which is something I personally disagree with. I think that, after watching the two shows, there are definitely some things that the reboot, does as well or even does better than the original show, which I will discuss later in my comparison. But overall, after watching the two shows, I realized that, I would be 1,000 times more likely to go back and rewatch the original Pretty Little Liars, which I have done many times, than this reboot. I don't think, if there's a second season, I might watch it, but I don't think I'll be going back to rewatch this. I don't know, it didn't stand out to me. It just wasn't very memorable to me, or impactful to me in the same way that the original show was. But again, if you did enjoy the show, if you thought it was better than the original, more power to you. I'm not here to change anyone's opinion or make them hate something that they liked. I'm just here to share my own opinion because I'm egotistical and I think my opinion matters more. So in this video, I want to go through a thorough analysis of different components of the two shows and explain where each of their strengths lie, like what the reboot did better versus what the original PLL did better, and compare why I still think the original show is better and will hold up more over time. So first of all, I'm going to start off by talking about things that I actually think the reboot Original Sin did well, perhaps even better than the original show. First of all, I thought it had a great intro sequence. Which is definitely a highlight. They, incorporated that iconic original intro song that they used in original Pretty Little Liars, which I think everyone would have rioted if they didn't use that song because it's so iconic. And I feel like a lot of shows nowadays, they really don't put a lot of effort into the intro sequence. Sometimes they just put in the title. So it was cool seeing an intro sequence that clearly had a lot of thought put into it, and there were a lot of details placed in the intro sequence that you might not pick up on if you're watching closely, and some of them you have to watch you know, watch episodes of the show to really understand the context behind. And like going back to the intro sequence after watching the host show you, like, oh wow, like this was foreshadowing, this like paid off. It was a really good intro sequence for a mystery show, in my opinion. Definitely worth not skipping at least, you know, a couple times when you watch it. So that's the first plus. I mean, the original also had a very, very iconic intro sequence, but I thought this one did a good job, you know, sort of remixing that to fit the vibe of this new show. So good on you for that, Original Sin. Second, like, they clearly increased the cinematography budget for this show, which was cool to see. They had like a lot of different lighting going on. They were clearly trying to be kind of experimental. They got that HBO Max coin, clearly. Though sometimes it felt like they were trying to be a little bit like too big for the britches. Like there's one shot, it was in the Beasley's like dining room where they kept holding a shot of like the wide shot of the whole table, where they're all symmetrical, like you can't even tell who's talking. It's like, what? Like, why are we trying to be Wes Anderson here? This is a teen drama. Like, sometimes I felt like they went a little bit too far into the experimental cinematography. But, you know, it was cool that they got some coin for that. So the third point that I'll say in favor of Original Sin, which is probably well, at least one of the biggest things that they did right, is that they did have a succinct plot. Like, it wasn't a perfect plot, but it was clear that they planned everything out from the beginning, and that, you know, there weren't very many plot holes. It was like pretty neatly wrapped up by the end of the season, which is something you cannot say for the original Pretty Little Liars, when they were just kind of flying off the cuff, trying to figure out whatever the hell they could do. This one, they clearly planned it out, so points in their favor for that. Fourth point in Original Sin's favor is that it was a shorter season, which means we got less filler plots, which was nice, because I think, well, when Pretty Little Liars was airing, it was, you know, when network television was still a thing, so it was just a thing to have like 20-something episode seasons, which, you know, like, it's a little bit too long for a season. So we got caught up in a lot of filler sometimes. So to shorten down the season to, what was it, like 10 episodes, I think was good, so we could get the plot out quicker and we weren't taken down too many tangents. So yeah, that's a point in its favor. I think it was nice that they still spaced the episodes out as well, so that we could get a chance to like dive a little bit into the mystery and not just like binge it all in one night and like know who A was by the end of one night, but like we got like weeks in between, you know, them HBO Max releasing the episodes, so we could like kind of theorize a bit, even though like I really was not, I did not care. I was not interested in the mystery, I'm sorry. Other points in Original Sin's favor, they definitely had more diversity and representation than the original show, which was the super upper class, you know, white picket fence white people in town in Pennsylvania, and in a way that played into the themes of the show, like this pretty, like beautiful exterior, like seeming like perfect, but like secrets underneath. But, you know, it was cool in this show to see representation of a more working class town, and all these teens had, you know, actual lived backstories that I feel like a lot of people can relate to, maybe in the way that they weren't able to relate to the original Pretty Little Liars, who, you know, when they tried to portray financial problems, even with Hannah, like they're still living in this huge house and like could afford designer clothes. So I don't know, like these teens seem to have problems that are probably relatable to a lot of people. Like they portrayed Imogen being pregnant and going through the struggles of teen pregnancy without making that her entire character and her entire character arc throughout the show. Obviously, I don't know a lot about this, how to portray, like, I don't know anything about pregnancy, honestly. But I thought that was good representation overall. I thought this show had pretty great representation. The last thing, which I think is the biggest thing for me that this show did better, the biggest point in its favor, was that it handled like trauma and abuse much better than the original show, as well as like inappropriate relationships, which were, if you've seen my last video, super not handled well in the last show. Yeah, again, it wasn't perfect in the reboot, but still definitely better than the original Pretty Little Liars. They had better handling of like age gap relationships. When like Wes was going after Tabby, it was made very clear in the show that, hey, that's not okay. And then there was a lot of discussion of sexual abuse. That was a big theme in the show. And I thought they like actually handled that well. I thought they did a good job. I mean, obviously this show is a horror show and there's lots of discussions and depictions of things that are a lot more graphic than were in the original Pretty Little Liars. Like, people are murdered by A, which I guess they were later in the original show, but they're like showing their death scenes and their dead bodies pretty graphically. There's a lot of discussion of a frank discussion of sexual abuse and trauma. I thought they did a good job compared to like shows like 13 Reasons Why. Like they had a chance in the show, especially showing these graphic death scenes, to actually show the sexual violence and like show a portrayal of the sexual violence and trauma or suicide that happened in like a very graphic, detailed way, like we saw in shows like 13 Reasons Why. And I'm very glad they decided not to do that, because as we saw with shows like 13 Reasons Why, it's not a good idea, and there's ways that you can show the impactfulness and the complete devastation of those experiences and those moments without actually going through a play-by-play. Like, I really liked the reveal with Chip, especially. That was probably my favorite reveal in the show, because it turned the narrative on its head that the person who like does these things to you is, you know, always like this outwardly evil, you know, misogynist type guy, you know, or that he's always like a stranger. Like, usually when that happens, it is someone close to you, and it is someone who like has a relationship with you in your life and may like present as nice. So it really dismantled like the trope of like the nice guy or whatever. So I thought that was handled really well. So yeah, credit where credit is due. I think those were the points where Original Sin really succeeded as a show, and maybe even surpassed the original Pretty Little Liars. But now we're gonna get into the points where I felt it failed, which are pretty large components. So, alright, so first thing that I felt that Original Sin was kind of lacking in was its main characters. So in the original Pretty Little Liars, like, the liars were kind of the main draw of the show. You really wanted to watch, like, follow their story, and a lot of people were really invested in their characters and like their relationships. But like, overall, when watching the reboot, like, I didn't find any of like the main liars compelling. Honestly, like definitely not in the way that I found the original girls compelling and like wanted to see their characters develop. Like I just didn't really find any of these girls to be interesting. I don't know. I felt like the writers tried to give them interesting personalities and stories, but they just kind of failed. And then another thing that I noticed was that like it was hard to get invested in the characters because a lot of them felt to me like they had like pretty inconsistent personalities throughout the show, so it was like hard to follow along with it, like get invested in the character when they like kept changing. I felt like Farron and Mouse were like especially prone to this, kind of like having there's not well written personalities. Like I felt like Farron was someone that I could have liked throughout the show because she seemed to be like, you know, the bad bitch one. She seemed to be like the most sure of herself, the most like confident and like willing to call people out on their shit, which I appreciated. But there were a lot of points throughout the show where I just did not understand what they're trying to do with her character because it just felt really inconsistent to me. Like, for example, there's like this one dinner scene with Farron and her parents. You know, her mom is talking about bringing her in for like some cosmetic surgery for her back because she has scoliosis, of course, which affects her life as a dancer. And I get at this point, Farron's mom is manipulating her, and you know, this is part of Farron's like character growth throughout the show, that she's like realizes her mom is manipulating her and like gets out of that situation. But I don't know, it's just the way that they do that is weird because like at this dinner, Farron is like totally on board with going in to get this surgery that her mom wants to get. She's like, her dad is against it, and he's like, Farron, maybe you should think about this, let her make the choice. But she seems like totally down with it, totally wanting to go. And then like literally the next day she like completely flips her perspective and is like, Mom, like you're just doing this because you want me to like look a certain way and you can't force me to go to surgery. And I was just like, huh? Like you were saying the opposite thing yesterday. And again, I get like that's her character growth throughout the show, like her breaking out of her mom's manipulation. But it didn't really feel like that. It just felt like she kind of like switched her opinion over so fast. Like there didn't feel to be like any period where she was like doubting what her mom was doing or like realizing the intentions, or like, I don't know. There didn't feel to be a shift. She just like completely 180'd, and it didn't really make sense to me. Like maybe the night before could have been like a breaking point for her, a turning point, or she was like, oh, Mom, I don't really want to go, but I'll do it because you want me to. But she seemed like totally on board with it. I don't know. Like, there's the two twins in the show, Kelly and Karen is killed at the little Halloween bash, homecoming dance, whatever the hell it is, Spirit Week thing. And then throughout the show, Farron suspects that Kelly is Karen, like, secretly. Karen is just pretending to be dead and assuming Kelly's identity, essentially. Yeah, and she seems like pretty set in this position, and then like some days she randomly just like flips, like, and changes her perspective. Like at the Halloween party, she's like, oh, I'm sorry, Kelly, I shouldn't have suspected you. And then she says like one thing off and she's like, no, you're Karen. I'm like, whoa, where is this coming from? And like she randomly decides to trust her again at one point, and I don't understand, because the writers seem to be wanting to make her this really like headstrong, person, but they don't do it, they don't write it in a way that makes sense to me. They write it in a way where she just like suddenly changes her opinion on things overnight, which is like just isn't, that's not how people work, really. So I just did not like what they did to her character. And then they did a similar thing with Mouse's character, where she just like flips her opinion on people really quickly and just makes assumptions. Like when her mom tells her that like her biological dad was actually the one who tried to like take her that day at the fair, like she automatically flips on her mom and is like, oh, he wasn't even trying to take me, like he wasn't even trying to kidnap me, he was just trying to meet me, like automatically making all these assumptions that like, like you've just learned this, shouldn't you be a little bit confused and shocked instead of like jumping to this conclusion right away? And that doesn't make sense because Mouse is like also throughout the show a super like quiet person who's very sensitive and like doesn't seem to jump to conclusions, is like forgiving of people. So I don't know why she just assumes the worst of her mom in that moment. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So yeah, like I was saying, it's hard to get invested in these characters and like relate to them and like, I don't know, feel compelled to like their personality when their personality seems to not be consistent and not be well written. Yeah, overall, I just felt like a lot of these, I don't really know how to describe it, but most of the characters in the show, like they felt written. Like it's not a dig at like the actors being monotone. It's more a dig at like the dialogue, which I'm gonna get into, but the characters, just the way, the things they said and the way they said it in the show, like didn't feel authentic to me. It didn't feel like real people. It felt like when I was watching it, it felt like I could like see the script essentially and see how they were just trying to forward the plot with it instead of like developing characters that would exist outside in like the real world essentially. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of like what I generally felt about the characters in the show. And I did not really like the writing in the show. I felt that the dialogue was not great, pretty bad overall, pretty like very, very cringy at points, like especially for Imogen. Like why she just talks like a middle-aged wine mom throughout the show. Like this is not how teenagers talk. It was just so awkward to watch at points. But you know, we also had some pretty cringy moments of dialogue in the original show, so I can't blame it for that. Honestly, those were the points that reminded me most of the original Pretty Little Liars in the show, so can't go too hard on them. But like parts of the dialogue seemed like very performative and inauthentic to me. Like especially with Tabby's character, like it was clear they were trying to, you know, be woke or whatever. And just this really, like, clearly Tabby is a huge movie buff. She loves the cinema. She, of course, probably wants to spotlight, you know, Black directors, female directors, because that's who she's aspiring to be. And that completely makes sense and is a great thing for her to do. But just the way that she's written in the show going about this seems to be very much written to me by like a team of white writers trying to be like, hey, our show wasn't so great at being unproblematic in the past, so now we're making it better. And I also felt like this show included too much like expositional dialogue at points. This goes into like the, you know, pretty golden rule of cinema, which is like show don't tell, which I felt the script did not follow. There were like points where the characters like had a voiceover like explaining the suspicious stuff that was going on or like what they were scared about, and it's like, you know, it felt like condescending. Like, you don't need to talk down to your audience. Like, show them, it's a mystery show, you know? Like, show them the suspicious stuff and like have the audience draw their own conclusions. I've seen like mixed opinions online about the increased use of swearing in the show. So like in the original PLL, it was, you know, I think it had a different TV rating, so they like couldn't really swear. In this one, they're swearing about every 5 seconds. Some people thought this was kind of overkill, but honestly, it felt pretty accurate to me. Like, teenagers swear a lot, especially if they're in a situation where they're like getting hunted down by a crazy killer. I feel like they would swear. Like, honestly, Noah, for me, which is like the character who got like called out for like swearing the most, she felt like the most authentic like teenager to me. Like when I watched the show, like when I watched it, I saw her and I was like, yeah, I met people in high school who were like this. Yeah, so now that I've talked about the main characters themselves and my problems with them, I kind of want to talk about the relationships between the main characters and the relationships, you know, with the main characters and other characters in the show. So honestly, the relationship between the main liars in this show seemed very forced. And it was pretty forced in the original show too, but even more in this one because like none of them really knew each other before the show started, except Imogen and Tabby. I get like the moms and the whole, you know, situation were what connected them. But yeah, they just didn't seem to have a really strong relationship throughout the show to me. They had like nothing that tied them together or would like make them friends. Like at the beginning of the show, Beasley, like the Sheriff Beasley, tries to make the three other girls who weren't friends turn on Imogen and Tabby and expose them to get them off. And like honestly, there's no reason why they wouldn't do that. Like, I don't see why they wouldn't take this offer. Like, they have no connection to these other girls. So, like, I didn't find the friendship between these girls compelling, which is a further point against the show. And then Kelly being shoehorned into the group at, like, the last episode made no sense to me either. Yeah, because Kelly was essentially either not standing up against Karen or trying to be Karen, who is a bully throughout the show. So why do the girls like her all of a sudden? I don't know. Whatever. Also, I found absolutely none of the love interests that any of the main liars had interesting. I did not care about their relationships at all, which ships were a huge part of the original PLL, so whatever. It doesn't have to be about the relationships, but that's just another point. I did not care about those relationships or any of the storylines with them. I just thought the relationship between the mothers of the 5 liars, I found that to be much more interesting than the relationships between the teenagers. Like, honestly, like, throughout the show, I was like, honestly, I'd rather be following their story. Like, that seemed like the more compelling plot to me and the more compelling, like, characters to me. I mean, I thought it was an interesting avenue and, like, sort of framework to, like, find out the story of the mothers and their relationship to Angela Waters through the teenagers. Yeah, I thought that was a good, you know, mystery framework because as the audience we're kind of put through, you know, Imogen and the other liars' eyes and like finding things out at the same time they do, essentially. So yeah, that was an interesting way to frame the show, I thought, but I also thought it might have been more interesting to spend more time with the mothers and like have them be the main plot line in the show. So another thing that really differed between this reboot and the original PLL for me was just kind of like the overall vibes of the show, I guess. Like, this reboot was, you know, it's just much more darker than the original show. Definitely more reminiscent of like the horror genre and played into a lot of horror tropes, which the original didn't really do. But yeah, this show reminded me a lot of Euphoria in some ways, gave me kind of Euphoria vibes, which then I realized since Euphoria has kind of been the biggest teen drama in the past couple years, I feel like it's been a pretty big cultural phenomenon, we're probably gonna get quite a few Euphoria copycats in the upcoming years. Like, this reboot is kind of like Euphoria, and then it's just a much darker, grittier, like, I guess, I don't know if uncensored is the right word, but like, I don't know, explicit portrayal of teenage life than the original show was. And I think that, you know, that it has its pros and cons. So one thing when I was watching this show that I felt like was completely missing, that was such a huge factor of the original PLL, was the camp. I was literally watching it like, where's the camp? These girls in the reboot would never get a text from A saying, call off your techno boy toy or I'll tell everyone what your mom hides in the lasagna box, okay? The writers did not have the range for that. I feel like this show had the potential to like play into camp elements like a lot more, especially because it was sort of, it could have been more of a parody of the horror genre if that was like sort of the direction they were going in, like wanting to be a more slasher show and feed into horror tropes. They could have sort of parodied that in a way where it had some like fun, lighter moments and some camp moments. It was sort of like a Ryan Murphy horror show, like Scream Queens or something. But ultimately, I felt like this show took itself way too seriously in a way that the original PLL didn't. And obviously the original PLL had its flaws and cringy moments, but I was more able to forgive them because I felt like that show recognized in some way that it, you know, was this silly little teen drama show and it wasn't that serious. Yeah, and I feel like this show may have shied away from the camp because they were scared of it. You know, when you see like cringe compilations for PLL, those are like, they put in those like I mean, they were cringy moments, like the lasagna box text and like their freaking page karaoke scene. Obviously, if you want to be like a serious filmmaker auteur, like Sam Levinson-esque type, you don't want to add those factors in and like, because you want people to take you seriously, but I feel like I don't know, that was kind of a flaw in this show because even though those, you know, the more camp moments in the original were things that people may have initially laughed at or cringed at, like, those are the things that stick in people's minds. That is what, those are the moments that made the original Pretty Little Liars so iconic and so culturally relevant, and so, you know, those are the moments that everyone still remembers and talks about today. That's what made the show last. And this show just totally lacked that. I thought it made it a lot less fun to watch and a lot less memorable, in my opinion. Like, even if they were going for Euphoria, like, at least Euphoria has some camp in it. So it's like, you can do this dark, gritty, like, everyone's gone through trauma and has the hardest possible life ever, and still make it, like, kind of fun to watch and not overly serious, because this show does not have the quality writing behind it to be this super serious show. And I mean, the horror genre inherently in itself, I'd say, is kind of camp. A lot of horror movies that people love are these like low budget B movies, you know, kind of over the top, over dramatic. That's what people love about it. This show didn't necessarily recognize that. They didn't recognize the camp and the playfulness that Original Sin could have potentially had. That would have made it a better show, in my opinion. Alright, so now I want to talk about the A reveal at the end of Original Sin, because I think this is the part of the show that a lot of people had a problem with or didn't really enjoy, including people who overall did like the reboot. This A reveal was pretty weak overall. I did like some aspects of it, but I just thought that the principal wasn't a very interesting choice. I don't think I didn't catch any clues for him being A throughout the series. He was just kind of a random character. I mean, at least he was introduced in the show beforehand, so he was a potential suspect. But it's just not a very interesting choice, I felt like. And while there were clues throughout the show for a family member specifically being A, and for A being, more than one person, which I actually liked that they did that. That they made one guy be the masked killer guy, and then the other guy be the mastermind, the one who's actually sending the text, and with the label A. I like that they did that. There were clues for that, but there were clues for the principal specifically. The principal's monologue was just kind of, I don't know, it wasn't scary, it was funny. I thought it was way too over dramatic and stupid. I mean, obviously they were playing on horror tropes by having him do a villain monologue or whatever, but I just felt like it was he was taking himself a little bit too seriously. I don't feel like they did a great job with making him seem sinister. And though I did like the idea of having two separate people be the different parts of A, essentially, Archie, who ended up being the Leatherface mask killer guy, he wasn't a character as much as he was just a plot device. I mean, he was just a killing machine, essentially, that the principal could turn on and send off to do his dirty work. His whole thing was he's motivated to avenge his sister Angela, but we never even see his real face in the show. He's not his own character at all, which I thought was kind of cheap. They could have given him, I don't know, actual development, actual face, actual motive, I don't know. Obviously, there were some pretty bad A reveals in the original PLL series as well, so not to dismiss that. But I think there's some recency bias, because I think if we think back, Mona's A reveal back in season 2 of Pretty Little Liars I thought that was much better developed and better executed than the principal's A reveal in the reboot, in my personal opinion. So now I obviously talked about the problems with the A reveal on the show, but I also thought that their characterization of A in general in the reboot was a little bit lacking. I mean, it was just a very different thing than the original show. The original show, A is kind of this anonymous, all-knowing presence that knows the girl's deepest secrets, and that's why they're able to blackmail the liars and get them to do their bidding. This reboot was much more of a horror show. So the face of A that we see essentially throughout the show is Archie, the masked leather killer guy. So it's more of a slasher. He's like a scary physical presence to the liars. I thought the A in the original show, like kind of like how it operated, it was just a more interesting and original concept to me, especially at the time, how its MO was like using technology. Like, I don't know, that was just a novel and interesting concept at the time. When it came out in 2010, the original show, we hadn't like talked too much about like the ramifications of technology and like how we're able to anonymously cyberbully people or like steal people's identities, whatever. I don't know. I thought that was one of the major strengths of the original series, like their conceptualization of this A figure, and how the specific method of how it was able to get to the girls and threaten them through being anonymous through technology. Like the way that A worked in the original show and the way that I felt like, you know, it could have worked in the show and sort of maybe was supposed to but failed at working at, was like it was able to blackmail the girls and turn them against each other in a way that A kind of became a parallel and, you know, reflection of the girls' own bad deeds. Like in the original show, like especially when A was Mona, the thing was Mona became A because of the liars' actions, because they bullied her. The girls themselves aren't innocent in this situation, and the liars are sometimes a conduit for A. Like A is able to blackmail them with certain things in the original show because they were like this all-knowing presence, and they kind of make the girls turn on each other and do A's bidding for them. So it's kind of like the girls have to reflect on their actions and like if they are any better than A, and like also what role they played in creating this A figure, and letting this happen, which I think was like a really interesting theme that the original show delved into. And I felt like this show really could have done it too. Like in the reboot, I feel like they are trying to get to a similar theme of everybody, you know, has the capacity and potential to be mean to others and take others down. But we also have the capacity to change and be better. This is talked about by Imogen at the end, by her talking about her mother and how she was a bully, but then, you know, she realized the errors of her ways. And then it's also sort of in the beginning episodes, this theme is kind of explored by the liars themselves, like Karen is bullying them, so then they decide to like expose a really private video of Karen to the whole school, which is obviously not a very great thing to do, and they're called out on this rightly, and they have to reflect and, you know, consider if, you know, their actions were really any better than Karen's. And I think A might have called them out on this, but then A doesn't really call them out on any of their actions again, or like, I don't know. I think A operating as, you know, more of this like scary physical presence in the show. And I think it takes away from the message of the show and also the A reveal. I feel like A operating as this sort of like foil to the girls who really makes them, you know, reflect on whether their own actions are similar at all to A, and if they could like change in any way to make themselves better people. I don't know, I think that would just be a more like interesting avenue to explore, especially with the mothers who were like confirmed bullies in the past and didn't stand up. Instead of just being tied up and tortured by A, it just could have been explored in a different way where like it had the mothers, or like both the liars and the mothers, like realize the wrongs of their actions through comparing them to what A is doing to them. I don't know. I felt like that could have been a more interesting avenue to explore. I feel like I'm not explaining this very well, but hopefully you get it. Instead, A is obviously in the wrong because he's out there literally killing people. So there's like no way that their actions can be at all equated. So that's kind of all the points of comparison that I have between the original Pretty Little Liars and the reboot that I want to discuss today. And overall, that's why I feel that this reboot kind of failed. All in all, I may have liked this show, Original Sin, better if it didn't have Pretty Little Liars in the name, because I felt like maybe I came in expecting something that I didn't get, since this show was, you know, very different to the original and very different to what, you know, my mindset was expecting coming into it. And I felt like the connections that they did add to the original show in the reboot were like very forced and unnecessary, like the Ezria name drop. Like, we did not need that, especially in a show that was trying to address and like call out inappropriate relationships, but now they're like, this one is the perfect one, this is the exception, I guess. And then also like how they just went into Rosewood for a night, like randomly, but we didn't. They couldn't even get the original actor for Eddie Lamb. And like, why would he still be working at the Radley? Like, that's a whole demotion. Like, I'm glad they let him keep his job, but he was a doctor. Wouldn't he want to continue like working as a psychiatrist and not be demoted to like a hotel manager? Whatever, I don't know. But then again, if this show did not have Pretty Little Liars in the name, I probably wouldn't have watched it. So there you go. It got the press. Overall, I didn't hate it. Like, I don't regret watching the show. I got a video out of it. I don't know. If I liked horror and got all the references, maybe I would have liked this show better. But let me know your thoughts. What you liked or didn't like about Original Sin. Did you think it was better than the original series? Anyway, that's about all I have to say. So I'll see you later, probably with some more content. I'm probably gonna verge off a little bit from Pretty Little Liars because there's only so much I can say. Hope you have a good one, I guess.